So thank you. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here and to be back in Greece. Every time I'm here, I hear more statistics about how well Greece is doing, and that's it's really wonderful. I've spent a lot of time trying to think of what word we can use to describe this current moment. You know, is it a turning point? Is it a paradigm shift? Is it transformative? What is the expression that we use to talk about our current era? And what I finally landed upon was a book title. So I've stolen this idea. And it's a book called The Hour of the Predator. And I do believe that we're living now in the age of the predator. We're living at a time when the United States of America no longer sees the world as a space for integration, mutual cooperation, everybody wins kinds of politics, and looks much more at the world as a zero-sum game. Where can we win? What can we take? What advantage can we have? We are, in Europe, also living next door to a Russian regime which has a truly hybrid plan to undermine governments, to use both kinetic, real warfare, as well as sabotage, acts of sabotage in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in the UK, in Germany, to undermine governments and political stability around the region, as well as the threats of military attack to destabilize the NATO as well as Ukraine. And also in a time when the Chinese increasingly see themselves, if not military opponents of Europe, but as a power who want to have control of all of modern technology, who want to be self-sustaining, and who also increasingly don't see Europe as a partner or a place of mutual investment, but again, as a source of, as a place where they can sell their stuff and not necessarily need to buy anything else. And paradoxically, what we have here at the moment is three great powers who are challenging Europe's ability to be sovereign. And this word sovereignty is really important and interesting at the moment because it's a word often used by the far right, who talk about the threats to sovereignty in Italy or in France, or in Poland or here. Whereas really, and they speak of the threat to sovereignty as if the threat were coming from the European Union, or from NATO, or from these multilateral European alliances. In fact, we're at a moment when exactly the opposite is the case. In other words, Europe is only going to be able to maintain its sovereignty. European democracies will only be able to stay democratic if they build up their ability to work together and give Europe a voice in the world. I'm sure we'll talk about this more on the panel, so I won't go into more details, but certainly in at least three areas, Europe now needs to think about how to become sovereign. One of them is in energy. Europe can be neither dependent on Russian gas nor American LNG because both can be used as tools of political blackmail to change and alter governments here. And that puts a push on the green transition, which we all thought of as some nice thing that we needed to do to save the planet. It now turns out that it's also something that has to be done if Europe is going to maintain its independence. Secondly, technology. Again, it's not just about wouldn't it be great if Europe had some of its own tech companies. It's a question of who is going to control political conversation. Here in Greece, in Poland, in Germany, in the UK, will it be the algorithms written in California and in Shanghai, or will it be European companies writing the rules, setting the rules of conversation and the rules of information according to European values and in ways that benefit European countries and strengthen European democracy? And we've just heard from Cyprus the importance of using tools of modern debate and conversation to strengthen democracy and not only to allow them to be undermined. We are right now at a moment when both American and Russian influence campaigns inside Europe are seeking to push the cause of the of far right, and sometimes in the case of Russia, far left parties. The only answer to this is for Europe to have its own way of communicating and distributing information according to rules that are more fair and, again, as I said, not determined from the outside. And finally, the most obvious, of course, is defense technology, which has been, I think, transformed to a degree that most Europeans still don't understand. I was last in Ukraine a month ago. I visited both a unit who were operating drone interceptors in the field, and I was in a couple of factories. This is now a cutting-edge technology. It's changing almost every month. Every European country that wants to be safe, that wants to understand how to protect its citizens in the future, should be involved in investing in Ukraine. Again, not just because it's nice to help Ukraine, but because that's really where the technological cutting edge is. It's not about buying big pieces of American equipment anymore. It's about modernizing European defense technology to keep Europe sovereign and to keep, and to keep Europe safe. I'll stop there, but I'm happy to continue.
Okay. Well, fascinating. I want to, before turning to Enrico, I'd like to unpack a couple of things there because there's a lot in that. First thing, it's striking in the way that you frame it as Europe under threat from these three hyperpowers, if we may call them that. I don't think Russia is a hyperpower, perhaps, but certainly China, America, but also the formidable presence of Russia. And you put America as a kind of, you did it as a kind of equal challenge for Europe. And I'm curious to know whether that is really the case. Is America really as much of a challenge to Europe as China, as Russia? And do you think that this is something that is specific to the current administration in America, or is it something that Europe is just going to have to get used to for the long term?
So it's very important to listen to what the Trump administration says, to read the documents that they put out, to read their national security strategy, to listen not just to the president, but to people around him. It's very tempting to frame this administration as, a strange moment in history with a president who's very whimsical and, intervenes in a soccer match one day and, in a foreign election the next without much strategy. But actually there is a group of people around him, and they are now people who have influence in politics and influence in the right-wing media sphere, who do now see Europe and European liberal democracy as a kind of enemy. And of course they see it as an enemy because they interpret European liberal democracies as being somehow the equivalent of the Democrats in the United States. They say it. You can read you can read them saying it. You can hear them talking about it. You can hear them talking about European civilizational collapse. You can hear them talking about Europe having letting in too many migrants, having changed its civilizational orientation. And so they understand that this Europe needs to be changed. And in the president's national security strategy, it was very clear that the US no longer sees itself as the leader of a democratic camp promoting democracy around the world, and we've heard that also from the president. But instead it sees itself with really there's only one part of the world where they're interested in political change, and that's in Europe. And so I think, again, U.S. is a very big country. Foreign policy is produced by many different institutions, by Congress, by the Democratic Party, as well as by the administration. But it's very important to listen to what they're saying and to take it seriously, because even after this president is gone and is replaced by somebody else, maybe even a Democrat, then this set of ideas is also going to remain inside the body politic, and it will have a set of adherents in Congress and elsewhere. And it's really important to understand that the speed with which the US made this shift is a kind of, which really has happened over the last decade. It should be taken as a warning that nothing is guaranteed, That of course there are long-standing ties to the United States and friendships and actually deep military partnerships. If you asked an American general, intelligence partnerships, if you asked an American general right now, who are your closest allies, he would say Europeans as well as the South Koreans and the Japanese. But all of those things are still there, but the ideological commitment to them, both at the top and in the country more broadly, is badly frayed. And so it's very important for Europe going forward to not be beholden or nostalgic for the past. I think as Mark Carney said, hope is not a strategy. Hoping that we will go back to where we were isn't really an option for Europe.
So one more question, and then I'll turn to Enrico. But you said that in the military sphere that Europe hadn't yet really grasped how fast things are changing on the battlefield and on the technological level. And I think you're saying, in a way, that Europe isn't really grasping the fundamental nature of this shift and the likely durability of this shift. Is that a fair assessment? Do you think we're still running behind? And you straddle, interestingly, the worlds of Europe and America. Do you think that we're still playing catch up in Europe in terms of getting our minds around quite how much the world has changed?
I think there are different, there are different interests. There depends who you speak to. There's some people who clearly understand the nature of the change and others don't. But look, Ukraine doesn't have a navy. It has no navy to speak of. And yet Ukraine chased the Russian navy out of the western part of the Black Sea and might well continue. Ukraine doesn't really have an air force. It has a very small one. And yet Ukraine is now able to attack Russian refineries very, very deep inside Russia. So eliminating the idea that Russia has, as President Zelensky said yesterday, that Russia even has a kind of safe strategic rear. I mean, unfortunately, if it's true of Russia, it's true of everybody. And so everybody's navy now needs to be a navy that takes into consideration the possibility that a very small $100,000 sea drone can take out a submarine, because that's happened in the Black Sea. And everybody needs to take into consideration the idea that their factories or their production lines, deep in the countryside, far away from the front line, aren't necessarily safe if there ever came to a shooting war. And as I said, there have been a number of really important European investments already in the Ukrainian drone industry, which is largely supported by European money. And this is also, there's been already in the last year an important transformation. I remember even a year ago people saying to me, but is it possible that Europe could support Ukraine? We don't have the resources. We can't do it without the United States. But it turned out that it was possible. And it just took a different way of thinking about what that support looked like. It wasn't a question of giving the Ukrainians tanks. It was a question of supporting the drone industry on the ground, doing joint ventures, doing deals, learning from this kind of constantly updated technological revolution that's happening there. So, there will still be a need for F-35s. There will still be a need for planes. But how they're going to be used is going to change a lot.